history of artificial intelligence, which of the GPTs would they put?
That is a good question. I sort of think of progress as this continual exponential. It's not like we could say here was the moment where AI went from not happening to happening. And I'd have a very hard time like pinpointing a single thing. I think it's this very continual curve. Will the history books write about GPT 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 7? That's for them to decide. I don't really know. I think if I had to pick some moment from what we've seen so far, I'd sort of pick ChatGPT. It wasn't the underlying model that mattered. It was the usability of it, both the RLHF and the interface to it.
What is ChatGPT? What is RLHF? Reinforcement learning with human feedback. What was that little magic ingredient to the dish that made it so much more delicious?
So we trained these models on a lot of text data. And in that process, they learn the underlying something about the underlying representations of what's in here or in there. And they can do amazing things. But when you first play with that base model that we call it after you finish training, it can do very well on evals. It can pass tests. It can do a lot of, there's knowledge in there. But it's not very useful, or at least it's not easy to use, let's say. And RLHF is how we take some human feedback. The simplest version of this is show two outputs, ask which one is better than the other, which one the human raters prefer, and then feed that back into the model with reinforcement learning. And that process works remarkably well with, in my opinion, remarkably little data to make the model more useful. So RLHF is how we align the model to what humans want it to do.
So there's a giant language model that's trained on a giant data set to create this kind of background wisdom knowledge that's contained within the internet. And then somehow adding a little bit of human guidance on top of it through this process makes it seem so much more awesome.
Maybe just because it's much easier to use. It's much easier to get what you want. You get it right more often the first time, and ease of use matters a lot, even if the base capability was there before.
And like a feeling like it understood the question you were asking, or like it feels like you're kind of on the same page.
It's trying to help you.
It's the feeling of alignment.
Yes.
I mean, that could be a more technical term for it. And you're saying that not much data is required for that. Not much human supervision is required for that.
To be fair, we understand the science of this part at a much earlier stage than we do the science of creating these large pre-trained models in the first place. But yes, less data, much less data.
That's so interesting. The science of human guidance. That's a very interesting science. And it's going to be a very important science to understand how to make it usable, how to make it wise, how to make it ethical, how to make it aligned in terms of all the kinds of stuff we think about. And it matters which are the humans and what is the process of incorporating that human feedback, and what are you asking the humans? Is it two things? Are you asking them to rank things? What aspects are you asking the humans to focus in on? It's really fascinating. But what is the data set it's trained on? Can you kind of loosely speak to the enormity of this data set?
The pre-training data set?
The pre-training data set, I apologize.
We spend a huge amount of effort pulling that together from many different sources. There are open source databases of information. We get stuff via partnerships. There's things on the internet. It's a lot of our work is building a great data set.
How much of it is the memes subreddit?
Not very much. Maybe it'd be more fun if it were more.
So some of it is Reddit, some of it is news sources, all like a huge number of newspapers. There's like the general web.
There's a lot of content in the world, more than I think most people think.
Yeah, there is like too much. Where like the task is not to find stuff, but to filter out stuff,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is there a magic to that? Because there seems to be several components to solve. The design of you could say, algorithms, so like the architecture of the neural networks, maybe the size of the neural network. There's the selection of the data. There's the human supervised aspect of it with, RL with human feedback.
Yeah, I think one thing that is not that well understood about creation of this final product, like what it takes to make GPT-4, the version of it we actually ship out that you get to use inside of ChatGPT, the number of pieces that have to all come together and then we have to
in a technical sense or a poetic sense. Does it need to have a body that it can experience the world directly?
I don't think it needs that. But I wouldn't say any of this stuff with certainty. Like, we're deep into the unknown here. For me, a system that cannot go significantly add to the sum total of scientific knowledge we have access to, kind of discover, invent, whatever you want to call it, new fundamental science, is not a super intelligence. And to do that really well, I think we will need to expand on the GPT paradigm in pretty important ways that we're still missing ideas for. But I don't know what those ideas are. We're trying to find them.
I could argue sort of the opposite point, that you could have deep, big scientific breakthroughs with just the data that GPT is trained on. So, like, I think some of it is, like, if you prompt it correctly.
Look, if an oracle told me far from the future that GPT-10 turned out to be a true AGI somehow, you know, maybe just some very small new ideas, I would be like, okay, I can believe that. Not what I would have expected sitting here, would have said a new big idea, but I can believe that.
This prompting chain, if you extend it very far and then increase at scale the number of those interactions, like what kind of, if these things start getting integrated into human society and starts building on top of each other, I mean, like, I don't think we understand what that looks like. Like you said, it's been 6 days.
The thing that I am so excited about with this is not this, and maybe Elon too. And he was visibly very hurt by that and said, you know, those guys are heroes of mine and I sucks and I wish they would see how hard we're trying. I definitely grew up with Elon as a hero of mine. You know, despite him being a jerk on Twitter or whatever, I'm happy he exists in the world. But I wish he would do more to look at the hard work we're doing to get this stuff right.
A little bit more love. What do you admire in the name of love about Elon Musk?
I mean, so much, right? Like, he has driven the world forward in important ways. I think we will get to electric vehicles much faster than we would have if he didn't exist. I think we'll get to space much faster than we would have if he didn't exist. And as a sort of like citizen of the world, I'm very appreciative of that. Also, like, being a jerk on Twitter aside, in many instances, he's like a very funny and warm guy.
And some of the jerk on Twitter thing, as a fan of humanity laid out in its full complexity and beauty, I enjoy the tension of ideas expressed. So, you know, I earlier said that I admire how transparent you are, but I like how the battles are happening before our eyes, as opposed to everybody closing off inside boardrooms. It's all laid out.
Yeah, you know, maybe I should hit back, and maybe someday I will, but it's not like my normal style.
It's all fascinating to watch, and I think both of you are brilliant people and have early on for a long time really cared about AGI and had great concerns about AGI, but a great hope for AGI. And that's cool to see. These big minds having those discussions, even if they're tense at times. I think it was Elon that said that GPT is too woke. Is GPT too woke? Can you steel man the case that it is and not? This is going to our question about bias.
Honestly, I barely know what woke means anymore. I did for a while, and I feel like the word has morphed. So I will say I think it was too biased and will always be. There will be no one version of GPT that the world ever agrees is unbiased. What I think is we've made a lot. Like, again, even some of our harshest critics have gone off and been tweeting about 3.5 to 4 comparisons and being like, wow, these people really got a lot better. Not that they don't have more work to do, and we certainly do, but I appreciate critics who display intellectual honesty like that.
Yeah.
And there's been more of that than I would have thought. We will try to get the default version to be as neutral as possible, but as neutral as possible is not that neutral if you have to do it, again, for more than one person. And so this is where more steerability, more control in the hands of the user, the system message in particular, is, I think, the real path forward. And as you pointed out, these nuanced answers that look at something from several angles.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. It's really fascinating. Is there something to be said about the employees of a company affecting the bias of the system?
100%. We try to avoid the SF groupthink bubble. It's harder to avoid the AI groupthink bubble. That follows you everywhere.
There's all kinds of bubbles we live in.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm going on like a around the world user tour soon for a month to just go like talk to our users in different cities. And I can like feel how much I'm craving doing that because I haven't done anything like that since in years. I used to do that more for YC. And to go talk to people in super different contexts. And it doesn't work over the internet, like to go show up in person and like sit down and like go to the bars they go to and kind of like walk through the city like they do. You learn so much and get out of the bubble so much. I think we are much better than any other company I know of in San Francisco for not falling into the kind of like SF craziness, but I'm sure we're still pretty deeply in it.
But is it possible to separate the bias of the model versus the bias of the employees?
The bias I'm most nervous about is the bias of the human feedback raters.
So what's the selection of the human? Is there something you could speak to at a high level about the selection of the human raters?
This is the part that we understand the least well. We're great at the pre-training machinery. We're now trying to figure out how we're going to select those people, how we'll like verify that we get a representative sample, how we'll do different ones for different places, but we don't have that functionality built out yet.
Such a fascinating science.
You clearly don't want like all American elite university students giving you your labels.
Well, see, it's not about...
I just can never resist that dig.
Yes, nice. But it's so that's a good... There's a million heuristics you can use. To me, that's a shallow heuristic because like any one kind of category of human that you would think would have certain beliefs might actually be really open-minded in an interesting way. So you have to like optimize for how good you are actually at doing these kinds of rating tasks, how good you are at empathizing with an experience of other humans.
That's a big one.
Like, and being able to actually like, what does the worldview look like for all kinds of groups of people that would answer this differently? I mean, I have to do that constantly. So like,
you've asked this a few times, but it's something I often do. I ask people in an interview or whatever to steelman the beliefs of someone they really disagree with. And the inability of a lot of people to even pretend like they're willing to do that is remarkable.
Yeah. What I find, unfortunately, ever since COVID, even more so, that there's almost an emotional barrier. It's not even an intellectual barrier. Before they even get to the intellectual, there's an emotional barrier that says no. Anyone who might possibly believe X, they're an idiot, they're evil, they're malevolent, anything you want to assign. It's like they're not even like loading in the data into their head.
Look, I think we'll find out that we can make GPT systems way less biased than any human.
Yeah. So hopefully without
because there won't be that emotional load there.
Yeah, the emotional load. But there might be pressure. There might be political pressure.
Oh, there might be pressure to make a biased system. What I meant is the technology, I think, will be capable of being much less biased.
Do you worry about pressures from outside sources, from society, from politicians, from money sources?
I both worry about it and want it. Like, to the point of we're in this bubble and we shouldn't make all these decisions. Like, we want society to have a huge degree of input here. That is pressure in some way.
Well, there's that's what, like, to some degree, Twitter files have revealed that there was pressure from different organizations. You can see in the pandemic where the CDC or some other government organization might put pressure.
And it's been very good.
It's a for-profit company. It's very driven. It's very large scale. Is there pressure to kind of make a lot of money?
I think most other companies wouldn't maybe now they would. It wouldn't at the time have understood why we needed all the weird control provisions we have and why we need all the kind of like AGI specialness. And I know that because I talked to some other companies before we did the first deal with Microsoft. And I think they are unique in terms of the companies at that scale that understood why we needed the control provisions we have.
And so those control provisions help make sure that the capitalist imperative does not affect the development of AI. Well, let me just ask you, as an aside, about Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. He seems to have successfully transformed Microsoft into this.
When those people discovered the transistor in the 40s, like, is this what they were planning on? All of the work, the hundreds of thousands, millions of people, whatever it's been, that it took to go from that one first transistor to packing the numbers we do into a chip and figuring out how to wire them all